Everyone in that Chicago penthouse learned to kneel, except the one woman who had nothing left to lose. For 4 years, the wife of a Korean mafia boss made her household staff prostrate themselves before her every single Friday. On marble floors, on raw rice, sometimes on broken glass. And if you refused, you disappeared. No questions asked. No one ever saw you again. Nadine Beaumont watched a 19-year-old girl kneel until her knees bled, sobbing apologies for breathing too loudly. And something inside this broken, blacklisted former investigator, who'd already lost her career, her reputation, and everything she owned for doing the right thing, simply snapped. She had $5 in her wallet, an eviction notice in her pocket, and a choice: bow down to save herself, or stand up and risk vanishing into the machinery of organized crime. Here's what she didn't know. The woman terrorizing everyone, this elegant socialite married to one of Chicago's most dangerous men, was hiding a secret so explosive it could shatter her entire world. A secret buried in a small town in Ohio. A secret that explained why she needed people on their knees. A secret worth killing to protect. When Friday came and every staff member knelt in that marble foyer, Nadine Beaumont looked the mafia boss's wife directly in the eye and said 2 words that would change everything. But would those 2 words save her or get her killed? What happened next? Nobody saw coming. Not the staff, not the husband, and definitely not the woman whose carefully constructed life was about to collapse with a single name. Stay with me. If you believe no one should be forced to kneel for another person's ego, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video if you stand against bullies who abuse their power, and comment "Dignity Matters" if you think respect should be earned, not demanded. Let's go. The elevator doors whispered open on the 45th floor, and Nadine Beaumont stepped into a world that didn't belong on Earth. Italian marble stretched before her like a frozen lake, reflecting the cascade of crystal from chandeliers that cost more than her entire education. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Lake Michigan in the dying light of afternoon, the water dark as spilled ink against the Chicago skyline. Everything gleamed, the gold leaf trim on the crown molding, the museum-quality paintings lining the corridor. The silence itself seemed polished to a mirror shine. But Nadine had learned long ago that the brightest surfaces often hid the darkest rot. "You must be the new girl." Rosa Mendez, the head housekeeper, materialized from a side hallway. Her face was kind but worn, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. "Come. Mrs. Park wants to see you before you start." They moved through rooms that belonged in architectural magazines, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a library with leather-bound books that had never been opened, a sitting room decorated entirely in shades of cream and gold. Nadine's maid uniform felt like a costume, the blue dress and white apron marking her as fundamentally separate from all this wealth. She needed this job. The eviction notice in her purse made that brutally clear. 6 months ago, she'd been Nadine Beaumont, senior ethics investigator at Morrison & Klein Consulting, the youngest person to ever hold that title. Then she'd uncovered a $50 million embezzlement scheme that went straight to the C-suite. She wrote the report, submitted it to the board, waited for justice. Instead, the company buried everything, destroyed her reputation, and made sure no firm in Chicago would touch her. Turns out, integrity doesn't pay the rent. "There are rules here," Rosa said quietly as they climbed a curved staircase. "Mrs. Park has expectations. Do exactly what she says when she says it. Never make eye contact unless she permits it. And when she—" A sound stopped her, a muffled sob coming from behind ornate double doors. Rosa's face went carefully blank. "Wait here." But Nadine was already moving. The investigator's instinct, the thing that destroyed her career and defined her life, pulled her forward. She pushed open the doors. The sunroom beyond was a cathedral of glass and light, palm trees in massive planters creating artificial shade. In the center, on the marble floor, knelt a girl who couldn't have been more than 19. Her uniform was identical to Nadine's. Her knees rested on a thin layer of raw rice spread across the marble. Blood seeped through the fabric at her knees. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Park. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to look at you. I forgot. I'm sorry." "You forgot." The woman standing over her was stunning. Elegant Asian features, a tailored mint dress that cost more than a car, diamonds at her throat that caught the light like trapped stars. Celeste Park held a glass of champagne in one hand, a fashion magazine in the other. She hadn't even glanced up from the pages. "How does one forget their place, Elena?" "I don't know, Mrs. Park. I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry." "You've been apologizing for 2 hours now." Celeste turned a page. "Perhaps you need another hour to truly understand." Something detonated in Nadine's chest, that old burning thing she thought had died when Morrison and Klein destroyed her, the thing that couldn't look away from injustice, couldn't make the practical choice, couldn't be silent when silence was safe. The fire that had cost her everything. "What the hell is this?" The words escaped before thought could stop them. Celeste's head snapped up, her eyes, cold, calculating, utterly merciless, fixed on Nadine. "I beg your pardon?" Rosa appeared at Nadine's elbow, fingers digging into her arm. "Mrs. Park, this is Nadine Beaumont, the new—" "I asked her a question." Celeste set down her magazine with deliberate care. "What did you say?" Nadine looked at Elena's bleeding knees, at the rice scattered like tiny weapons across marble, at the casual cruelty in Celeste Park's posture, the champagne, the magazine, the complete indifference to suffering. She'd lost her career for telling the truth. Her apartment was next. What did she have left to lose except the last shred of who she was? "I said," Nadine met Celeste's gaze directly, "what the hell is this?" The sunroom went silent. Even Elena's sobbing stopped. Celeste smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to my home, Miss Beaumont. I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation about respect." For the first time in 6 months, Nadine felt something besides despair. She felt purpose. The week passed in a blur of polishing silver that didn't need polishing and washing windows that were already spotless. Nadine learned the rhythm of the penthouse, the silent mornings when Jin-Song Park left before dawn, the tense afternoons when Celeste held court in the sitting room, the evenings when the staff moved like ghosts through marble halls, desperate to remain invisible. She also learned about Friday. "It's inspection day," Rosa explained on Thursday night, her voice barely above a whisper as they folded linens in the service corridor. The older woman's hands trembled slightly. "Mrs. Park inspects us each, personally." "Inspects how?" Nadine asked, though the dread in Rosa's eyes already told her the answer. "We kneel in the foyer. She walks down the line, checks our uniforms, our hands, our hair. If she finds anything wrong, a loose thread, a stain, dirt under a fingernail, there are consequences." Rosa's fingers worried at a pillowcase. "Sometimes the consequences come even when everything is perfect." "And everyone does this? Every Friday?" "Everyone." Rosa's voice dropped even lower. "The ones who refused aren't here anymore. Mrs. Park doesn't tolerate defiance. Her husband's reputation makes sure of that." Nadine had seen Jin-Song Park exactly twice since her arrival. Both times he'd been a silent presence, moving through his own home like a shadow in an expensive suit. He never spoke to the staff, never acknowledged Celeste's cruelty, just watched with dark, unreadable eyes and disappeared into his study. "What about him?" Nadine asked. "Does he know what she does?" Rosa's laugh was bitter. "He knows everything that happens in this house. He just doesn't care." That night, Nadine lay in her tiny room off the kitchen and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her knees on that marble floor, about bowing her head while a woman who'd married into power reminded her she was nothing, about surrendering the last piece of dignity she had left after Morrison and Klein had taken everything else. She thought about Elena's bleeding knees. By Friday morning, she'd made her decision. At 10 o'clock sharp, Celeste's bells summoned them. The staff assembled in the grand foyer: Rosa, Elena, 2 other housekeepers named Marie and Yuki, the chef, the driver, 8 people whose livelihoods depended on the whims of a woman who found cruelty entertaining. Celeste descended the staircase like a queen approaching her throne. Today she wore ice blue, diamonds glittering at her wrists. Her heels clicked against marble with the precision of a metronome. "Line up," she commanded. They formed a row. Nadine stood at the end, her heart hammering, but her spine straight. "You know what to do." One by one, they knelt. Rosa first, then Elena. Nadine saw the girl wince as her knees touched the floor, the wounds from the rice still healing. Marie and Yuki followed, then the chef, his face carefully blank. The driver was last before Nadine. Celeste moved down the line slowly, inspecting each person like livestock at auction. She found fault with everyone: a wrinkle in Marie's apron, a loose hair on Yuki's collar, imaginary dust on the chef's sleeve. Each criticism delivered in that same cold, bored voice. Then she reached Nadine. "Kneel." The foyer held its breath. Somewhere in the apartment, a clock ticked. Lake Michigan sparkled through the windows, indifferent to human drama. Nadine remained standing. "I said kneel." Celeste's voice sharpened. "Now." Nadine met her eyes directly. In her peripheral vision, she saw Rosa's face go white with terror, saw Elena's eyes widen, saw the other staff frozen in their submissive postures, witnessing something they'd never thought possible. "No, ma'am," Nadine said clearly, her voice steady. "I don't kneel." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Celeste's face underwent a transformation: shock, then unbelief, then something dark and volcanic rising beneath her composed surface. Her hand tightened around the inspection glove she carried until her knuckles went white. "What did you just say to me?" "I don't kneel." Nadine kept her voice respectful but firm. "I'm happy to stand for inspection if that's what you require." Movement in the doorway made everyone's heads turn. Jinsong Park stood there in his characteristic black suit, silent as always. His eyes moved from Celeste to Nadine and back again. For just a moment, so brief Nadine almost missed it, something flickered across his face. Interest, assessment, something that wasn't quite approval but wasn't disapproval either. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Celeste's face had gone from pale to flushed, rage modeling her perfect complexion. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was, Nadine realized, genuinely speechless. In 4 years of terrorizing her staff, no one had ever simply refused. Celeste's voice shook. "You will regret this." "Perhaps, but I still won't kneel." Celeste's retaliation came within the hour. Rosa delivered the news with an apologetic grimace, finding Nadine in the service hallway. "You're being reassigned, Mrs. Park's personal maid." What happened to her last personal maid? Rosa's silence was answer enough. The position was exactly what Celeste intended, a punishment disguised as a promotion. Nadine spent 14-hour days attending to Celeste's every whim, pressing clothes that didn't need pressing, reorganizing closets that were already organized, standing silent in the corner while Celeste made phone calls, ready to fetch whatever small cruelty occurred to her mistress in the moment. But Celeste had made a critical miscalculation. The woman who'd spent 3 years investigating corporate fraud now had unrestricted access to her enemy's private world. Nadine documented everything. Photos of the bruises on Elena's arms where Celeste had grabbed her, voice recordings of the verbal abuse, the threats, the casual cruelty delivered in that bored, aristocratic voice. Timestamps showing patterns. Celeste's worst behavior came after phone calls with certain people, after particular triggers Nadine was beginning to map. She worked carefully, using the phone she'd kept hidden in her room. Every night after Celeste dismissed her, Nadine compiled her evidence like she was building a case file, because that's exactly what this was. Late on Tuesday, almost midnight, Nadine slipped into Jin Sang's study to photograph a document she'd glimpsed earlier, a guest list from the charity gala where Jin Sang and Celeste had supposedly met.
She was almost finished when a voice from the doorway froze her in place. "That's an interesting way to spend your evening." Ginseng Park stood in the shadows, still wearing his suit despite the late hour. Nadine's mind raced through explanations, excuses, but the investigator in her knew when lies would only make things worse. "I'm documenting your wife's abuse of the household staff," she said simply. He moved into the room with that same predatory grace she'd noticed before. Up close, his face was harder to read than she'd expected, not cruel, but carved from something that had learned not to show emotion. Why? Because someone should. You could have simply quit. "I could have." Nadine met his gaze, but then nothing would change. She'd just find new people to break. Ginseng studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Friday, when my wife ordered you to kneel, why did you refuse?" The question hung between them like a test. Nadine thought about lying, softening the truth, but she'd already lost everything once for integrity. She wasn't about to lose herself now by giving it away. "I've already lost everything for my integrity, Mr. Park. My career, my reputation, my savings. I won't lose it again by giving it away, even to save a job I desperately need." Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but recognition. He moved to the window, looking out at the Chicago night. "My wife carries heavy things from her past. Sometimes the cruelest people are protecting the deepest wounds. That doesn't excuse what she does to them." "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." He left without another word, disappearing into the darkened penthouse. Nadine stood in the study, her heart hammering, trying to parse what had just happened. Was that a warning? Permission? Something else entirely? The next morning, she sent an encrypted email to Marcus Chen, her old mentor from Morrison & Klein, one of the few people who'd still talk to her after everything fell apart. His response came that evening. "The ones who need power most are compensating for the powerlessness they once felt. Find where she felt small. That's where the truth lives." Nadine started digging that night. Public records, social media, digital archives. She searched for Celeste Park, expecting to find the usual trail: college transcripts, previous addresses, family connections, old photos, the digital fingerprints everyone left in the modern world. She found nothing. No university records, no previous employment history, no family members tagged in photos, no friends before the marriage, no LinkedIn profile, no paper trail of any kind. Celeste Park's existence seemed to begin 5 years ago at a Chicago charity gala, as if she'd materialized fully formed in that mint-colored dress and diamond necklace. Rosa's words echoed in Rosa's memory. It's like she appeared fully formed. Nadine had investigated fraud long enough to recognize a pattern. People who erased their pasts were always hiding something, and people who hid their pasts with this level of thoroughness had secrets worth protecting. She leaned back in her small room, staring at the blank search results on her phone screen. Celeste Park didn't exist before Ginseng Park, which meant Celeste Park wasn't her real name. Nadine smiled in the darkness. She'd found the crack in the crown. Now she just needed to pry it open and see what spilled out. If you can't stand people like Celeste who torture others to hide their own shame, drop a like on this video and hit the subscribe button. Comment "Stand Up" if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter their job or background. The kitchen at 2 a.m. belonged to a different world than the penthouse above. Here, the marble was scuffed from years of use, the appliances industrial rather than ornamental. Rosa sat across from Nadine at the small staff table, cradling a mug of chamomile tea like it was the only warm thing in her life. 23 years I've been in domestic service, Rosa said quietly. I've worked for movie stars, tech billionaires, old money families who trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. Mrs. Park is different. Different how?
Rosa stared into her tea. The others had histories, friends who visited, family who called, stories about where they grew up. Mrs. Park has nothing. No mother, no siblings, no childhood friends, no one from before. She looked up, her eyes tired. It's like she appeared fully formed 5 years ago, like she didn't exist before she became Mrs. Choi.
The confirmation settled over Nadine like snow. She'd suspected, but hearing it from someone who'd watched Celeste for years made it real. Has she ever mentioned where she's from? Monaco, supposedly, but she never talks about it, never mentions specific places, specific memories, just this vague European elegance. Rosa's mouth twisted. I speak 4 languages, Miss Beaumont. I know what Monaco French sounds like. Whatever accent Mrs. Park had before, it wasn't that. After Rosa went to bed, Nadine returned to her room and opened her laptop. She'd photographed several framed pictures from Jin Song's study during her cleaning duties, mostly shots of Celeste at various society events. Now she cropped one, isolated Celeste's face, and ran it through a reverse image search. For 2 hours, nothing. Then, at 4 in the morning, a hit. The photo was grainy, pulled from a local news website in Dayton, Ohio. The article was dated 7 years ago. Local residents attend multi-level marketing launch event. In the background, barely visible, stood a younger woman in a cheap blazer and too much makeup. The caption read, Candace Millbrook among attendees. Nadine's pulse quickened. She copied the name into every database she could access. Public records, court filings, old social media accounts that predated privacy settings. The story emerged piece by piece, like a body floating to the surface. Candace Marie Millbrook, born in Dayton, worked at a Kroger grocery store for 6 years, married Derek Trent at 23 in a courthouse ceremony, divorced 2 years later in proceedings that mentioned financial crimes and manipulation. Then Nadine found the mugshot. The woman staring back at her was definitely Celeste, younger, harder, with bottle blonde hair and eyes full of something between defiance and desperation. The charge? Conspiracy to commit check fraud. She'd been arrested alongside Derek Trent, who turned out to be a small-time con artist specializing in pyramid schemes and fake check scams. The case file included a restraining order Candace had filed after the divorce. Her harassment, she claimed, was preventing her from starting over and becoming someone else. Someone else. Nadine kept digging. At dawn, she found a video on a local Dayton access channel, one of those community spotlight segments. A 24-year-old Candace Millbrook stood in her Kroger uniform, stocking shelves while a too cheerful host asked about her dreams. Nadine hit play. So, Candace, what are your goals? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? The young woman's accent was pure Ohio working class, flat vowels, dropped consonants. Her posture was hunched, defensive, like she was trying to take up less space. I don't know, somewhere better than here, I guess? Anywhere specific? Anywhere I don't have to... She stopped, her face flushing. Anywhere people don't look down on you for working in a grocery store. Somewhere I matter. The shame in her eyes was visceral. Raw. She looked at the camera like it was judging her, finding her wanting, like she was on her knees begging the world to see her as something more than a checkout girl in a name tag. Nadine stopped the video and sat back, the pieces finally sliding into place. Celeste made people kneel because Candace had spent her whole life feeling like she was on hers. The grocery clerk who married a con artist, who got arrested for bad checks, who filed restraining orders and fled her hometown with nothing but shame and desperation. She'd reinvented herself so completely that even her accent had changed, and every time she forced someone to their knees, every time she made them small, powerless, beneath her, she was proving to herself that she'd escaped, that she was no longer the woman from Dayton that didn't matter. The cruelty wasn't about power, it was about terror. The terror that someday someone would speak the name she'd buried and drag Candace Millbrook back into the light. Nadine looked at the mugshot on her screen, then at the window where dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan. She'd found the crack in the crown. Now it was time to shatter it completely. The Cook County Courthouse opened at 8. Nadine was there at 7:30, waiting on the steps with coffee going cold in her hand. She'd called in sick to the penthouse, the first time she'd missed a day since starting. Rosa had covered for her without asking questions, which meant Rosa suspected exactly what Nadine was doing.
The court records clerk was a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain who looked like she'd processed 10,000 requests and would process 10,000 more. She barely glanced at Nadine's form before disappearing into the back. 20 minutes later, she returned with a thin manila folder. Marriage certificate for Jinsong Park and Celeste Dubois, dated 5 years ago. Nadine's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. There it was in black ink, Celeste Marie Dubois, birthplace listed as Monaco, previous residence Paris. No parents listed, no family contacts, just a woman who apparently materialized in Chicago at age 28 with no past and no connections. The witnesses were interesting too. Jinsong's attorney and a restaurant owner named Marcus Leong. Nadine made a note of both names. Can I get copies of any other documents filed around the state? Immigration records, name change petitions? The clerk's eyebrows raised slightly. That would be in federal records. We wouldn't have those here.
But Nadine didn't need federal records. She had something better. 6 hours in front of a computer and the investigative skills that had once made her the best at her job. She found the charity gala from 5 years ago buried in society pages. Annual winter charity benefit at the Drake Hotel, December 12th. Photos showed Chicago's elite in evening wear, champagne glasses raised, checks being written for causes they'd forget by morning. She almost missed it. A single image in the background of a wider shot. The coat check station. And behind it, a young woman in a black vest and white shirt, her hair pulled back, taking a fur stole from an elderly patron. The resolution was terrible, but Nadine knew that face. Candace Millbrook, working coat check at the gala where she'd meet her future husband. Nadine pulled up Jinsang's Wikipedia page. According to the timeline, he'd been recently divorced when he attended that gala, his first marriage having ended badly with a wife who'd married him for money and status. The articles from that period described him as guarded and disillusioned with Chicago's social scene. She imagined it now, the powerful man, tired of fortune hunters and social climbers, meeting a coat check girl who claimed to be a mysterious European transplant, a woman with no connections to his world, no social circle to judge him, no past to complicate things. Celeste had crafted herself to be exactly what Jinsang Park needed after his first disaster. The psychology textbook Nadine had referenced during fraud investigations sat on her desk back at the penthouse, but she didn't need it now. The pattern was clear as glass. Celeste tortured the household staff because they were mirrors. Every maid, every housekeeper, every person who cleaned and served and remained invisible, they reflected Candace Millbrook back at her. The grocery clerk, the coat check girl, the woman who'd felt beneath everyone her entire life. Making them kneel wasn't about establishing dominance, it was about distance. Every time someone prostrated themselves before her, Celeste proved she was no longer that woman. She wasn't the one kneeling anymore. She'd climbed so high that others bowed at her feet. And the more viciously she could make them submit, the further she was from that courthouse in Dayton where she'd stood in an orange jumpsuit being processed for check fraud. The further from that Kroger where people looked through her like she was furniture. The further from every moment of her old life when she'd felt small, worthless, invisible. It wasn't about power at all. It was about terror. The terror that one day someone would say her real name out loud, that the carefully constructed identity would shatter like crystal, and everyone would see what she'd been running from. That Jinsang would look at her and see not the elegant socialite he'd married, but Candace Millbrook, the grocery clerk who married a con artist and got arrested for fraud. That's why she had no friends, no family, no past, because every person who'd known Candace was a potential grenade that could destroy Celeste. Nadine closed her laptop and stared out the coffee shop window at the Chicago streets. She thought about power and fear, about the walls people built around their weakest points, about the difference between cruelty and desperation. Then she thought about Elena's bleeding knees, about Rosa's trembling hands, about 4 years of systematic torture inflicted on people who'd done nothing except remind a frightened woman of who she used to be. Understanding someone's pain didn't excuse what they did with it. Nadine paid her coffee and headed back toward the penthouse. She had everything she needed now. The question was what to do with it. Actually, that wasn't a question at all. She'd already decided the moment she refused to kneel. The summons came on Thursday afternoon, Celeste's bell, sharp and demanding. When Nadine entered the sunroom, she found her mistress standing by the windows, backlit by the late autumn sun. The glass room felt like a cage made of light. "Close the door," Celeste said. Nadine did. The click of the latch sounded final. Celeste turned, and for the first time since Nadine had arrived, the mask had slipped. Her elegant composure was frayed at the edges, her eyes hard with something beyond cruelty, desperation. "I've been patient with you, more patient than you deserve, but my patience has limits." She moved closer, her heels clicking against tile. "You will kneel before me today, right now, or you will disappear. My husband can make that happen. One call and Nadine Beaumont becomes a name no one remembers." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Nadine understood its credibility. Ginseng Park's world had dark corners where problems vanished without questions asked. But Nadine had already lost everything once. What was there left to take except her life, and a life lived on her knees wasn't worth keeping. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, unfolded it slowly, deliberately, then placed it on the glass table between them.
The mugshot stared up at both of them. Young, desperate, bottle-blonde Candace Millbrook in an orange jumpsuit. "Hello, Candace Millbrook," Nadine said quietly. Celeste's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "Kroger grocery store in Dayton, Ohio," Nadine continued, her voice calm and factual, the investigator's voice. "Married Derek Trent at 23, divorced 2 years later after he was arrested for running pyramid schemes. You were arrested too, conspiracy to commit check fraud. There's a restraining order, court records, a video of you stocking shelves, telling an interviewer you just wanted to go somewhere people wouldn't look down on you." "Stop!" The word came out strangled. "Everything you've built, Celeste Park, Celeste Dubois, the refined European socialite, it's all armor, protection." Nadine met her eyes. "You make people kneel because you spent your whole life afraid you'd end up on your knees again. Every maid, every housekeeper, we remind you of Candace Millbrook, the invisible woman who didn't matter. So you break us to prove you're not her anymore." "I said stop." Celeste's hands were shaking now, her carefully constructed accent slipping. "You don't know what it was like. You don't—" "I know enough." Nadine's voice softened slightly. "I understand why you ran, why you rebuilt yourself. But understanding doesn't excuse 4 years of torture. It doesn't excuse Elena's bleeding knees, or Rose's nightmares, or the people who disappeared because they reminded you of the woman you were. You self-righteous—" Celeste lunged forward, but froze as a voice cut through the room. "I've been listening." Ginseng Park stepped from the adjacent room, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. He looked at his wife, and the disappointment in his eyes was more devastating than anger could ever be. "I knew who you were, Candace, from the beginning. I knew about Dayton, about Derek, about the arrest. I married you anyway, because I believed you'd transformed, that you'd grown past your shame." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "But instead, you spent 4 years punishing innocent people for the crime of reminding you of yourself. That I cannot forgive." "Ginseng, please." Celeste reached for him, but he stepped back. "My attorney will contact you tomorrow. Pack what you need. You have 1 hour." Within 60 minutes, it was over. Celeste, Candace, descended the stairs with a single Louis Vuitton suitcase, her face a ruin of smeared makeup and broken pride. The staff had gathered in the foyer without being summoned, drawn by some instinct that history was being made. No one spoke as she walked past them. At the door, she turned back once, her eyes finding Nadine's. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said, her accent pure Dayton now, all pretense gone.
No, Nadine replied honestly, but I'm not ashamed either. The door closed. The penthouse exhaled. Elena approached Nadine slowly, tears streaming down her young face. She didn't say anything elaborate, just, "Thank you for standing." Jin Sang's attorney arrived an hour later, a sharp woman named Catherine, who placed a contract on the dining table. Director of Ethical Operations for Park Industries Legitimate Businesses, $180,000 salary, full benefits, complete autonomy to investigate and reform company practices. She looked at Nadine over her glasses. My client needs people who can't be bought or broken. You proved you're both. That evening, Nadine stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. Behind her, she could hear the staff in the kitchen. Actual laughter, real conversation, the sound of people no longer afraid in their own workplace. She'd lost everything twice now, once for exposing corruption at Morrison and Klein, once for refusing to kneel. But this time, standing for what was right had given her something back. Not just a job or a salary or a second chance at her career. Dignity, purpose, proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is remain standing when the whole world tells you to kneel. The city lights began to sparkle below, and Nadine allowed herself a small smile. She was still standing. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If Nadine's courage inspired you, if you believe standing up for what's right matters even when it costs you everything, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Smash the like button if you're against people who use power to break others, and comment below where you're watching from. And tell me, would you have had the courage to refuse to kneel? I read every single comment. Let's build a community that stands for justice, dignity, and truth. See you in the next one.